Let's turn our attention now to building custom handlers. So we've looked at the application class and how you can intercept application level events anywhere in the pipeline. Handlers are something you might want to build if you are trying to create your own custom endpoint that is not a page and you want to process the request in a lower level fashion without the infrastructure of the page and the server-side control architecture around you. So it's worth pointing out initially that every ASPX file does turn into a page, which in turn implements the iHTTP handler endpoint. So by default, all of your pages obviously are endpoints, and the only requirement that's necessary to become an endpoint is to implement this interface, iHTTP handler. So what you can do if you want to is build additional classes that implement iHTTP handler directly. And we'll have to configure ASP.NET to recognize this handler, and we'll also have to map a specific path or extension onto this handler. So we need to tell ASP.NET when to invoke this particular class's process request method, and how to map it onto us. And as we'll see in a few minutes, for handlers to be invoked, the path in IS6 and earlier must be mapped onto the ISAPI DLL for ASP.NET. So this is, and I'll show you an example of this, but if for example, you want to associate the extension foo with a new endpoint, the foo extension is not recognized by IIS by default. So you're going to have to go into IIS and tell it, look, if you get the foo extension or a request for a foo file, go ahead and hand it over to ASP.NET. And at that point, ASP.NET will figure out how to dispatch it onto your custom handler. But just keep that in mind, and we'll do examples of that in just a moment. So what is this interface, the iHTTP handler? Well, here's what it looks like. So iHTTP handler, it has one method that's really of interest to us, which is process request. And notice what it takes for a parameter, a context. So there you have everything you need to know about the current request, and you can go about populating the response if you want to, setting the response content type or whatever makes sense. You can implement this is reusable, and the default factory will actually pool you if you return true here. So if you end up returning true from is reusable, it will pool instances of your class and dispatch onto them after the fact. So if you have any state that you maintain across requests in a handler, which is not usually a good idea anyway, you definitely want to return false here. But in general, it probably won't make much difference either way. Now, if you actually want to take control over the handlers at a higher level, you can also implement the factory yourself. And the factory is exposed via the iHTTP handler factory interface. And this just gives you a level above that, a way of retrieving the handler. So it says, hey, go give me the class that is capable of processing this request. Here's the URL, here's the request type, and here's the path that was requested, as well as the context. And given all that information, you could then go figure out which instance of what class you wanted to use to process the request. And these are both configured the same way, so it doesn't matter which interface you implement, ASP.NET will invoke either process request or get handler for you to initiate the endpoint dispatching.